All right, so we've got a stack of articles here all about the SEC versus Ripple case. Seems like it's heating up again with this SEC appeal, and, well, we need to unpack it all.
Yeah, it's definitely a complex one. And the implications could go way beyond just Ripple and XRP. This whole thing, it's really pushing the boundaries of how securities laws apply to cryptocurrency in general.
Definitely. It's almost like trying to fit those square pegs into round holes, legally speaking.
Yeah.
But before we get ahead of ourselves, I think we should get everyone listening on the same page. I mean, this whole thing started back in 2020, right? When the SEC sued Ripple, claiming they were selling XRP as an unregistered security.
Right. And that distinction is critical because being classified as a security, that comes with a whole other set of rules from the SEC, rules that traditional financial markets, they're used to it. But the crypto world, they're still trying to figure it all out.
It's like somebody suddenly telling you, hey, you need a driver's license for that bicycle. But then Judge Torres ruled in July that, well, XRP, when it's sold on exchanges, to the public, it isn't a security. That felt like a pretty big win for Ripple at the time.
It was a significant victory for sure. Judge Torres, she based her decision on the idea that everyday buyers on exchanges, well, they weren't buying XRP with the expectation of making a profit solely from Ripple's work. And that's a key part of what's called the Howey test. It's like the big test to figure out if something's a security.
So the Howey test basically checks if what you're buying is, well, is it an investment? Like, are you relying on someone else's work to make you money?
That's the gist of it.
And in the case of these public sales, Judge Torres, she didn't see it that way. But then just when you thought things were getting a little clearer, bam, the SEC decides to appeal the ruling. And that's where these articles come in.
And this is where it gets even more interesting. Because the SEC, they aren't directly challenging that whole XRP as security part of the ruling, at least not yet.
Wait, they're appealing, but not the main point. What's happening there?
Well, it's a strategic move. They're focusing on different aspects of the original ruling. Specifically, they're going after some of those sales made by Ripple executives, and also what are called institutional sales. This is where we kind of have to get into the nitty-gritty of securities law.
Okay, so walk us through it. Why are these specific sales different to the SEC? What's the big deal?
It boils down to that Howey test again. See, the SEC claims these specific sales. They're different from the public ones on exchanges. They might actually pass the test. These sales, they involve direct agreements, promises made to bigger institutional investors. And what the SEC is saying is, these agreements imply that those investors were counting on Ripple's actions to increase XRP's value, which makes it seem more like a security, you see.
So even though buying and selling XRP, like regular people do on exchanges, that isn't a security according to the ruling. These other sales, the ones with the big investors, those might be a different story.
Exactly. It all hinges on the details of how the sale went down and what promises were made. Think of it like this. You buy a loaf of bread at the store.
Right.
Just bread. But let's say a bakery says, hey, we'll buy back that bread later, but at a higher price. And they're saying that because of their secret recipe or something.
Yeah.
That's a whole different ball game then. Different implications. The context is key.
Okay, that makes sense. But while we wait, that July ruling, it still stands, right? I think it was Ripple's chief legal officer, Stuart Alderati, who said that the XRP is not a security part of the ruling. He said it stands as the law of the land. Was he exaggerating?
He's right. For now, that part of the ruling is the law. But, and this is a big but, this appeal, it's creating uncertainty. Like hitting the pause button on a movie right at the climax. Nobody knows what's going to happen next, and that makes investors nervous. It makes the market nervous.
Yeah, and it has ramifications for everyone in crypto, not just Ripple. Everyone's watching this, seeing how it plays out, because this could set a major precedent for how cryptocurrencies are regulated, moving forward. So even though Judge Torres, she sided with Ripple on the public sale thing, this appeal, it's like the entire crypto industry is holding its breath, waiting to see what happens.
Absolutely. Because you see, if the SEC wins this appeal, even with that July ruling in place, it gives them a roadmap. They can say, look, even if regular trading of a token doesn't fall under securities laws, if there are sales with agreements, direct promises to certain investors, then it might.
So it's like they're drawing a line saying, okay, up to here is the Wild West of crypto. After this, our rules apply.
Exactly. This case, it's forcing us to ask some really fundamental questions about finance, but, in the digital age. What is a security when we're talking about something like digital assets? How do these technologies, how do they fit in with the rules that we've already got for financial regulations? And how do we balance encouraging innovation, but also protecting investors? It's bigger than just XRP.
Yeah, it's a lot to think about. And honestly, it gets even more confusing when you think about, well, Ripple was already hit with that $125 million civil penalty. So if XRP isn't a security when it's traded on exchanges, where did that penalty come from? Seems like a contradiction.
That seeming contradiction, it just goes to show how complex this whole thing is. See, the SEC's original complaint, it wasn't just about the public sales of XRP. They were also looking at, like we said, those institutional sales, agreements with those bigger investors. And they claimed that Ripple was basically, well, doing unregistered securities offerings through how they were using XRP in other ways. So that penalty, it probably came from all those things together, not just the public sale aspect.
Okay, so that makes a bit more sense. But we're still in this weird waiting game, right? There's a ruling, but it's on appeal. There's a penalty, but maybe it gets looked at again. It's enough to give you whiplash.
You're telling me legal battles, especially when you're dealing with new technology like cryptocurrency, well, it's rarely a clean and quick resolution. Things are murky for a while.
So where does that leave us? What should someone listening to this, trying to follow this whole case, trying to understand what it means, what's the big takeaway here?
Well, that's the million-dollar question, isn't it? The real answer is we have to wait. Wait and see how this appeal goes. But there are a few things to remember. One, this is far from over, and whatever happens, it'll likely have a ripple effect, pun intended, on how other cryptocurrencies get regulated.
It's like watching the first domino fall, and there's a whole long line behind it.
Exactly. Second point here, this case is a reminder, the crypto regulation. This stuff is not simple. There are a lot of different parts, different ways to interpret it all, and frankly, a lot on the line.
Which brings us back to that $125 million penalty. If selling XRP publicly isn't considered a securities transaction, why the penalty in the first place? It's like saying you can drive your car on city streets, but you're getting fined for having it parked in your driveway.
I like that analogy because it gets right to the core of it. We have to remember, the original ruling, the penalty included, it was based on the SEC saying that Ripple broke securities laws in a bunch of different ways, not just by selling XRP to the public.
So even though that part of the ruling, the public sales bit, even though that's being appealed, that doesn't just erase the penalty.
Exactly. The appeals court, they could say, yeah, the penalty stands, even if they agree that XRP isn't a security when sold on those exchanges. Or they could say, go back and look at it all again. Lower court, whole thing, penalty too.
So it's like there's this whole other legal battle happening with the penalty, and it's running alongside the appeal on the XRP sales themselves.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it. And this is what makes this whole case so important. It's not about just one cryptocurrency or one company, really. It's about setting a precedent. Like, how are these legal frameworks going to be applied to this totally new asset class?
The crypto world is watching and waiting to see what happens.
Very true. But while we wait for the courts to do their thing, there are some things we can take away from all of this.
Totally. I mean, I'm seeing a huge need for clearer regulations. It's like we're trying to sail without a map or a compass.
I couldn't agree more. In cases like this, they force regulators to really look at digital assets, establish some guidelines for everyone.
It's like they say, technology is always a step ahead of the law, right? And in the crypto world, that can cause a lot of problems.
You're right, but this uncertainty, it also creates opportunity. It lets the industry be innovative and experiment as it develops.
So as we wrap up, what's the one thing you really want our listeners to remember?
This case, it's not over, right? Not by a long shot. Whatever they decide, it'll have a lasting impact. These decisions could change crypto regulation, not just here, but possibly everywhere.
It really makes you think, and it shows how important it is to stay informed. This world of finance, it's changing fast, and we need to understand what's happening. So to everyone listening, keep those questions coming, do your research, and we'll be here to help you make sense of it all.
Absolutely. The more we all know, the better we can shape the future of this industry. It's an exciting time.
And on that note, one last thing to ponder. We talked about how the SEC thinks some of Ripple's sales were maybe securities offerings. But what about everyone who bought XRP on exchanges, thinking it wasn't a security? What happens to them if the appeals court sides with the SEC? It's a question that gets to the heart of this case, and it highlights the need for clear rules in the crypto world.
It's a really interesting question, and one that I'm sure will be talked about for years.
As always, it seems like the deeper we go, the more questions we end up with. We'll definitely be keeping an eye on this case as it moves forward. We'll keep you updated on any big rulings or news. Until then, keep learning, and we'll see you next time.